Good evening and welcome to Merit Watch tonight. My name is David Craig. Great to be with you. Several things have been unfolding over the weekend, and as we move into this week of looking at all things here in Canada when it comes to politics, culture, and current affairs, the different events that are happening, one thing I want to get to, we'll be joined by Trish Wood here in a couple minutes, and we're going to be talking about truth and transparency amongst politicians as well. There's an interesting story. It's a heartbreaking story that is developing in Eastern Canada about two children who have gone missing, and it's an unsolved right now crime, potentially a crime we don't know is what happened to them. We're going to dive into that with Trish Wood as she gives us all the details. But before we do that, just a couple quick updates and announcements as President Donald Trump has been teasing since yesterday that there is a giant earth-shattering announcement between Canada and U.S. that's going to come out. We don't know when he's going to say it, but the one thing that he has said is it does not have to do with trade. There's speculation about does it have to do with the border patrol being pulled back, or maybe there is no more border patrol between the two countries. Anyways, it's going to be interesting to see what that is. I do not have a crystal glass ball. I wish I did so I could tell you what it was, but we are going to be waiting to find out what is this, or is Donald Trump playing games? Obviously, this comes out in wake of the meeting between Mark Carney and President Trump last week, as depending which side of the aisle you fall on, you either thought it was a fantastic meeting for Mark Carney or you thought it was absolutely an embarrassment for Mark Carney. And that's the one thing I kind of want to touch on today is this idea of truth and polarization and transparency. But how can truth exist if we become so tribalistic in our thinking? And this is something I want to challenge all of us as citizens of Canada as we move forward. Doesn't matter what side of the aisle that we are on, doesn't matter where we stand politically, but one thing that we should be chasing down is truth, because truth is something that can enlighten you. Truth is something that will lead us down a path that will bring prosperity, that will bring success. It will bring a greater Canada if we pursue truth. Truth meaning we have facts, we have reason, we've got opinions, and we're able to form what is the best path to move forward. But if we are unwilling to have conversations or listen to maybe what someone else who has a different opinion than us, or if we're even unwilling to give accolades to someone who we think different than, or is on a different side of the aisle than we are when they do something well, I think we might be part of the problem. And this is something that gets passed down. This is something that accumulates. This is something that isn't easily developed, actually is developed over time. And one of our goals here at Merit TV is to be able to bring to you what is going on within politics and culture in Canada. If Mark Carney, if whether you like him or you don't, or whether you voted for him or if you didn't, if he's done a good job, we want to be able to say he did a good job in this area. If he did a bad job somewhere, we want to let people know this is what we think is actually a bad job, and here's why. Not just someone who spouts a certain way because we think a certain way. We want to analyze what's actually happened. And I think all of us as citizens, even the media and the legacy and the MSM here in Canada, this is something that we all have to strive to. I think maybe for some of us it is lost in the sense of mainstream media oftentimes just delivers one side or how they think. But we have a goal to be able to get people back to the table to have conversations. If we think different, if we have different opinions, we should be able to converse with each other and let the best idea, let the best opinion win. And if we feel like someone asks why or they disagree, we shouldn't feel challenged. We shouldn't feel attacked by that. We should be able to hear them and listen. Why do you think that way? Unfortunately, this has been something that we've accepted as citizens from our politicians, from the different parties, from even mainstream media. We've allowed this idea of propaganda to be acceptable. We have lost the acceptance of truth, I should say the standard of truth. An example of this, and something we're going to continue following, is to find out how does Prime Minister Mark Carney, how does his relationship with President Donald Trump, how does it stand? What is their history? Is there a bit of a friendship there? Is there not? Because Mark Carney's whole campaign was on the idea of anti-Trump sentiment, elbows up, this whole idea that he is attacking our sovereignty. And you know what? If there's political strategy, we seem to accept those type of things by saying it's political strategy. Say what you need to say to get into office. You need to do what you need to do to get into power, and then you need to do good. The problem with that is I don't think that happens. The problem with that is I don't believe the end justifies the means. I do believe as citizens we have to have higher standards for our politicians, that when they're not truthful, we have to call them out for it. When they write out lie, we have to say that is false. When they don't tell the whole truth, that is something that we have to be able to say, what is the whole truth? We as citizens, again, the responsibility is on you and it's on I as citizens to allow. Remember, we accept the things that we allow. We accept the things that we tolerate. And if we tolerate as it being normal for politicians to fudge the truth or not say what actually is happening, then we are tolerating and we are allowing that departation from truth. And that's something we cannot accept as citizens. And if we want to see a great Canada, we have to get back to truth, challenging, and we also have to get back to requiring our leaders to speak truth. But we also, as citizens, have to be able to speak truth, not just some blind tribalistic wording that goes to defend something we believe because we only want to believe this. I believe we can have constructive conversation. I believe we can work together and get back to where truth is at the forefront. But it's going to take a lot of hard work from you and I, and also our politicians moving forward. And I do have high hopes that we can make that happen, but it's going to start right here at Merit TV Canada. We're going to be joined right away by Trish Wood, but we'll be back right after this break. Welcome back to Merit TV Canada. My name is David Craig. I got Trish Wood with me, who is an investigative journalist. She's a writer. She's a podcaster as well. She's got some great thoughts and opinions that I've seen over the last while. Trish, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I'm great, David. How are you?
Yeah, we're doing good. Every day is a fun day as you continue to follow what's happening in Canada. There's a lot of interesting stories that keep evolving from uh, obviously, we have a minority government 2 weeks in now, approximately, with Mark Carney and his government. You've got the rise of potential regional divide in Alberta as that fire is being stoked,
Yeah.
and lots of interesting things going on. But the first thing I would love to get to, and there's a big story that has been growing and getting more worldwide attention that's actually coming out of Eastern Canada in Nova Scotia. And there's two children that have gone missing, a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, a brother and a sister, Lily and Jack, I believe their names are. Could you maybe just fill in the audience what's been going on over the last several weeks with that, and where are we at now?
Sure, happy to. Given that originally I was CBC Fifth Estate, but then went into true crime for about 10 years. So I know that territory really well. What we know is based on what the parents are saying.
Okay.
Right? What their stories about what did or did not transpire that day. And if they're lying or fudging, then that means that the whole investigation and the way they focused it is based on bad information, right? The kids could have been gone 2 days before, and maybe they didn't say anything.
Yeah.
Right. So
Okay.
that's kind of where we stand on that. But it's morphing into a big, Nancy Grace type of Keith Morrison true crime thing. And people are really talking about it. I think the police have to be more forthcoming. They have to have a better news conference than the one they had, which, by the way, opened with a land acknowledgement. Respectfully, they were there to announce that the kids were dead and might be dead. And they spent a long time wasting time. They didn't sort of get to the point of the news conference until quite a few minutes in. And it just didn't feel right to me.
Yeah.
They weren't, usually when the police announce that they think someone is deceased, they're very respectful. They do the, our hearts go out to thing. And none of that happened in that news conference. So again, there's a lot of weird stuff going on. And it's just ginning up the attention for this story around the world. So, and maybe an amateur sleuth will solve it. Sometimes they do,
Yeah. Well, from what I've been able to see from it is they've had you said they pared down the search that they had been going for a while. They had over 160 searchers, including ground teams, drones, and canine units, and a very dense force from what it seems like in that area. And so, despite the efforts, as you said, very few clues, very few pieces of information have actually come forth to put a proper timeline. And the child's stepfather, Daniel Martel, seems to be cooperating with the RCMP going forward. So, as you said, it's going to be an evolving story. I know we'll keep our eye on it to see what's going, but our hearts and our thoughts and our prayers definitely go out to the family and the community as they're at the center of this horrific story. I can't imagine having to being a parent and having to go through that type of thing as well. But
No, it's terrible. But I 1,000% I agree with
yeah,
you, David. But as a, as somebody who's covered this stuff too, the RCMP need to be more clear and I think more
okay.
forthcoming. The idea that you clamp down on information to keep the investigation integrity intact, I think is bad, especially in a case like this.
What do you mean by clamp down on information? What do you mean by that?
Well, they haven't been very forthcoming. I could see them; they're struggling, but they haven't been very forthcoming with it. And so I feel we need more. They didn't really do a lot of. If she's out there, we need to keep the parents front and center doing these pleas. If they were kidnapped, they've got to be addressing. That stuff hasn't really happened.
Yeah.
And I think it's
Yeah.
because they made maybe a false or a faulty anyway assumption that the kids were in the woods at the beginning of this. And if that turns out not to be true, wow, it's a big deal because
Yeah.
that's where they were focused for quite a
Exactly.
while.
You're starting off on a completely wrong trail then.
Yeah.
We're going to have to book you back again to have maybe weekly updates on this and continue to follow it as we go. But I do want to shift the conversation just a little bit over to Prime Minister Mark Carney. And he's now taken office. His formed government 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
First off, what general thoughts on his first meeting with President Donald Trump? I know you saw that, but how do you think that meeting was? Do you think it was a good first step? It's a very different tone change from his campaign. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Wow. Well, I started my show this week by playing the opening of an old documentary on something called the Rorschach test, which is the ink blot test. And psychiatrists will show an ink blot to a patient, and one patient will see a butterfly, and one patient will see a deadly dragon. And based on what you see, they kind of try to diagnose what's wrong with you, what your psychiatric problem
Yeah.
is. And I feel I said this that meeting in D.C. was a kind of a Rorschach test for this country because if you looked at who said what after it was over and after seeing the video of it,
Yeah.
people who like Carney thought he was fantastic.
Yeah.
Right? He's really taking him on, and it was so classy, and this is how you handle Trump. And people who don't like Mark Carney were saying, oh, he looked very nervous and scared. And why wasn't he more verbal? And he only got 4 minutes and Trump got 35 minutes and stuff.
Yeah.
So you could divide. I mean, it was really a divisive thing. And it made me think about how are we ever going to get to a place in this country where we're all not half crazy from propaganda
Yep.
if we're seeing the same event and thinking something different about it. I mean, how do you explain that, right? It's crazy.
That's I'm really glad you brought that up. That's a fantastic thought because that was one of the first thoughts I had when scrolling through X and scrolling through the news. And you would see people praising Carney for how amazing he did. He really showed Trump his strength and his thought. And then people who hated him was like, Carney got absolutely demolished. What an embarrassment. You couldn't be more polar opposite than what I thought the feedback was. And I think that's a larger indication of the problem we have here in Canada. And part of the battle I think we're facing going forward, and we're trying to help with that here at Merit TV, is just to get people back to the table to have conversations and not have to be so distant. Like, let's be reasonable. You're a big proponent of critical thinking. We should be able to, whether we like someone or not, call out the actions for as they are, or at least give our perspective and be open to hearing the other side. And that I feel is unfortunately getting more lost on us as citizens. And I think that's a key component if we want to see Canada be able to maybe move forward from this polarization that we have seen.
Well, it is. And the media plays a big role in this because
Yep.
they just feed our dopamine receptors with stuff that we want to hear and not things that we need to hear or just reporting something basically because it's true, right? So one of the things that I noticed about the meetings, like I never know what Trump's going to do. And it's kind of fun, actually.
Yeah, I don't think anyone does.
No, you never know. But one thing he did, and I thought this was very interesting, he really was kind of not being very nice about Chrystia Freeland, right? He was
Right.
really crapping on her. So I'm thinking, did his research people tell him that Mark Carney is the godfather of Chrystia Freeland's son? Like, does he know that? Is he saying that to test Mark Carney? Is he trying to get a rise out of him? And it was I'll tell you what, it reminded me of there's a scene in the Meghan Markle and Prince Harry documentary that's quite famous now because it's so awful, where she is mocking the Queen
Mm.
and having to do a curtsy to her. And she does this, she says like medieval times in tournament, this kind of cheesy restaurant, and she does this deep bow and just really looks terrible. And there's a shot of a reaction shot of Harry watching his wife demean his beloved grandmother, the now dead Queen. I think she was dead at the time it was released. And that's kind of what Mark Carney looked like. Like he was sitting watching Trump really demean a woman that clearly Mark Carney is very, very close to. He's
Mhm.
godson, right? And he just got red-faced and said nothing.
Yeah.
And I thought, maybe I'd like him more if he'd said, even in a joking way, she's a friend of mine, but he didn't. He sat there and let Trump really kind of criticize her very, very profoundly. So that said something to me about him. And my view, I'm not a fan of his, so I'm on one side of the Rorschach inkblot. But
Yeah.
but I saw a guy who I thought he looked uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I thought he looked a little bit frightened. And I also have seen this in him before. He is not a person who is not used to deference. He likes to be deferred to. He gets mad when journalists ask him hard questions, right? He can be quite off-putting and shirty when people say things he doesn't like. And I could see that rising in him. He was not, he wasn't happy with some of the things Trump was doing, but I think he was trying to hold it together. I don't know. Do you think he should have defended Chrystia Freeland?
Yeah, my thoughts on that was I actually thought his opening statement when he was there, I was like, okay, that's a decent opening statement expressing want to work together, let's build strength and strengthen our ties.
Yeah.
Give him the first maybe minute, I was like, okay, that's a decent start. But when that Chrystia Freeland moment came up, doesn't matter, I think, what side of the aisle you're on. If you have a team member, someone that means a lot to you, and you have other people that are demeaning them or outrightly just roasting them,
Yeah.
you would expect, first off, as a leader, you would protect the people that you have your trust and faith in. Unless he's planning on tossing to the side and not being a part of what he's doing, fine. But typically, for someone close to you and on your team, you would stand up. At the very least, you can say, well, President Trump, we have very different feelings about Chrystia Freeland. She's served us. Like some sort of line to the fuse where you're not creating a fight with Trump, but you're also showing that you can defend. That was disappointing to me
Yeah.
just from a leadership standpoint, because
Yeah.
any leader, you want to go to bat for your team if they're on your team. So that was an interesting thought for me as well.
Well, and the other part of it too, David, is that we need to live in a world again where people tell the truth, right? Where live not by lies is kind of everybody's slogan. And to sit there, and if he would defend it by saying for diplomatic reasons he didn't want to get into a fight about her or something like that, the world is a better place when people say nicely, look, she's a friend of mine, dude, and I wish you wouldn't say that about her. We can maybe talk about it later or something.
Yeah.
But we're not going to get better as a society and a culture and a political landscape until we start telling the truth. And I include politicians and elected leaders in that right at the very top. They should be modeling this behavior. And I am sick of the fact that they move farther and farther away from a truth model. I mean, the thing about Carney is I did a lot of research about him for my Substack followers
Okay.
because they wanted it. So I just made it I was getting up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning every day not every day, but for about 20 days during the election, and doing deep research on things and that weren't being reported by legacy media. One of them, by the way, was the Brookfield deal, in which Kushner was bailed out and money was run through Brookfield for Kushner from Qatar.
Yes.
And obviously he's, Trump's beloved son-in-law and the husband of his super beloved daughter.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, nothing illegal was done at all. It was investigated. Nothing illegal. Was kind of a little bit conflict of interest because Jared was on the Middle East file at the time, so that's not great. But it does also bring to the table another layer of what do these guys really think of each other? Because although Mr. Carney was not at Brookfield when the deal was made, he was at Brookfield when a senior Senate Finance Committee was investigating it. So he would know all about it and have read everything.
Yeah.
So they sit there. It's like that great scene of The Princess Bride, right? Where they're trying to figure out who's going to try to kill each other first, sort of this great argument. And it's sort of like, I look at them and I think, well, is Trump looking at him saying he's got something on me? Or is Carney looking at Trump and saying he's got something on me? Like those kinds of things really muddy the water in human relationships and especially politics. So that might explain a bit of what was going on. But just the other thing I wanted to say about the lying is that we know who Mark Carney was before the election campaign, and what happened during the election campaign did not represent his writing and thinking. Like they never talked about net zero. He didn't talk very much about all the stuff that would make half the country really angry. So omission to me is also lying. And I'm not going to let Pierre Poilievre off the hook. I mean, I think there were things he should have said, but he didn't as well. I was quite disappointed by that. But so that the winning at any cost is what corrupts us. Yeah. And it's the Clinton model of, lie to get power, and then once you're in, you can do good or something. But my feeling is if you are able to lie so easily and be dishonest so easily, then you shouldn't be governing.
Yeah.
Right? You should be prevented from governing if you're going to be that way. You're not a good person, right? That's what I think.
It's the end justifies the mean concept. And there's this standard that's been lowered over the years where citizens just expect politicians to be deceptive. It's normal and it's almost acceptable, like, oh yeah, well, not a big deal because it happens all the time. And that was one of the biggest problems I had. I don't mind if Carney and Trump have history and business history. When you get into that level of business, it's a small world when people are going around. So it's no problem with that. But when there's deceptiveness beside it, the elbows up, anti-Trump sentiment, and if there is a difference, that's the problem I have, because it's perpetuating this idea of say what you need to say. They call it political strategy to get into the office. And I do think that we have to be able, I don't know how we do this. It's more open conversations, be willing to confront the truth and not be demonizing people who bring things up, but able to be like a dog on a bone when it comes to, we want truthfulness, we want transparency, we want honor and integrity to go back, starting from the leadership in the country, because it does fall top down, in my opinion.
No, I think that's really smart. And what you're talking about really is the fact that the Liberals weaponized the Trump derangement syndrome at play in this country. It's quite huge. In order to get ahead. So do we know, does Mark Carney really not like Trump? Or do they always have this kind of grudging respect? Brookfield is a company that deals in real estate. Trump is a big builder in real estate. Maybe they all were friends before this. So also the weaponization, the demonization of Trump, and he's a guy who's done a lot of things that bug people. I admit that. But just weaponizing him to get elected and then going back to being friends with him, I don't like that stuff. I don't. I mean, I think it's better they're friends. I think he should never have weaponized it, but I think it's better that they're friends, because maybe they'll get better deals for our country, right?
If it works out that way, great. But again, I appreciate you advocating for the truth and transparency. I think that's a broader conversation we can keep pulling up. But Trish, we're out of time. I so appreciate your thoughts on so far what we've talked about today. But thank you again, Trish, for joining us.
Thanks, David.
We'll be back right after this. Well, welcome back. My name is David Craig. What a great conversation with Trish Wood. I do appreciate her thoughts and ideas that comes about truth, about critical thinking. First and foremost, our thoughts and our prayers go out to the families and this community over in Nova Scotia that is dealing with this tragedy or this potential tragedy as it unfolds. If you do have any information or you have any thoughts, feel free to reach out to us, and we will definitely connect you if there's anything that comes through. But be watching as that story unfolds, as it will be garnering more and more attention, especially as the RCMP handles this story to find out what has happened over in Nova Scotia when it comes to the two missing children. But I want you to think hard on this idea of truth. And are you adding to the problem, or are you adding to the solution when it comes to truth? Do you have the ability to be able to state and give compliments or give accolades to someone who does something well, even if you think different or you don't like their political strategy, or if you don't agree with all their policies? Or are we people who are just going to rag on those politicians or or the other party just because we didn't vote that way. I do believe we have to get back to where we can reach across the aisle and find things that we have common ground on, find things that we can work together. I believe that is the only way we're going to make a strong path forward where all provinces are happy in this thing that we call federation here in Canada, where provinces can thrive and citizens can thrive. That is the recipe to make Canada great and make it move forward. Thank you for joining us tonight, this evening. Hope you have a great evening. We'll talk to you soon.